What if I told you the voices that brought your childhood cartoons to life were sometimes drowning in chaos when the cameras and microphones shut off? It's one thing to watch your favorite animated hero save the day, but how would you feel if you learned the person behind that character was battling real-life darkness? Ever wondered what secrets the world of cartoon voice acting hides? Stay tuned, because some of these stories might just flip your nostalgia upside down. Peter Robbins. Imagine growing up as the voice of one of the most beloved characters in American animation, Charlie Brown. Now, imagine your adult life becoming a far cry from those innocent holiday specials. That's the story of Peter Robbins, a child star whose journey turned from heartwarming to heart-wrenching. Robbins was just 9 years old when he first stepped into the recording booth and gave life to Charlie Brown, the perpetual underdog of the Peanuts gang. His voice became the soundtrack to countless childhoods, immortalized in classics like A Charlie Brown Christmas and It's the Great Pumpkin, Charlie Brown. But fame at a young age didn't translate into lifelong happiness. Far from it. After the glory days faded, Robbins struggled to find his place in the world. The acting offers dried up. He tried real estate, odd jobs, anything to recapture a sense of normalcy. But behind closed doors, he was at war with himself, fighting mental health issues and bouncing in and out of treatment centers. Things took a darker turn in the 2010s. News broke that the original Charlie Brown was facing serious legal trouble, stalking, threats, and repeated probation violations. At one point, he was arrested for harassing a plastic surgeon over his girlfriend's botched procedure, and later, he reportedly offered money from jail for someone to harm a county sheriff. But the most tragic twist wasn't the crime. It was the endless cycle, run-ins with the law, courtrooms, then rehab, then relapse. He was diagnosed with bipolar disorder and spoke publicly about his struggles, hoping to help others avoid his path. In interviews, Robbins said he still loved meeting Peanuts fans, even as he grappled with his own pain. He tried again and again to turn it around. The world wanted Charlie Brown to get a happy ending. Real life had other plans. Robbins's story is a reminder. Sometimes the voices that bring us comfort are carrying burdens we never see. The blockhead we all rooted for never quite outran his own storm cloud, but for millions, his voice will always be a symbol of hope and resilience, even if the man himself lived in the shadow of both. Greg Burson. If you grew up on Saturday morning cartoons, chances are you've heard Greg Burson's voice, even if you never knew his name. He was a chameleon behind the microphone, slipping from Yogi Bear to Bugs Bunny to Mr. DNA in Jurassic Park, becoming the go-to guy when animation's biggest legends were gone. But Burson's real life? That was a dark, spiraling episode Hollywood never aired. Burson started as a protege of Daws Butler, the original Yogi Bear, learning from the best. When Butler passed away, Burson was handpicked to keep Yogi's legacy alive. He did more than that. He kept half the Hanna-Barbera universe running, stepping in for Huckleberry Hound, Quick Draw McGraw, and countless others. To fans, his work was seamless. The cartoons sounded the same. The magic never stopped. But behind that effortless delivery was a man wrestling demons no cartoon could chase away. By the 2000s, Burson's career was derailed by severe alcoholism. Colleagues noticed him slipping, missed appointments, erratic behavior, lost gigs. But nothing prepared anyone for the night of May 2004, when police surrounded Burson's home on a kidnapping call. What started as a domestic dispute escalated into a tense 6-hour standoff with a SWAT team. Inside, Burson was armed and reportedly intoxicated, his life unraveling in front of the world. The story made headlines for all the wrong reasons. The voice of Yogi Bear was now a danger to himself and others. That incident didn't just end his career, it became his legacy. Hollywood studios, once eager for his talents, now wanted nothing to do with him. Isolated and battling addiction, Burson faded from the industry he helped sustain. Friends and colleagues said the loss of his work fueled his depression, and the drinking only got worse. He died in 2008 from complications related to alcoholism, just 59 years old. There's a cruel irony in the story of Greg Burson. He gave new life to childhood icons but couldn't rescue himself. For those who grew up hearing Yogi's wisecracks, the truth behind the voice is a harsh reminder. Sometimes the people who make us laugh the hardest are the ones fighting the deepest battles. Roger Bumpass. Think Squidward is just a grumpy neighbor in Bikini Bottom? Well, his real-life counterpart has had his own share of messy, not-so-cartoonish run-ins. Roger Bumpass might sound familiar to millions of kids, and secretly to just as many parents, because he's the guy behind Squidward's legendary sarcasm and sighs on SpongeBob SquarePants. But back in 2016, Bumpass's off-screen drama had fans doing a double take and Nickelodeon holding its breath. The night in question started like any other in Burbank, California, until police found a car sitting awkwardly in the middle of the road. Roger Bumpass was leaning against it, looking anything but animated. Cops reported classic signs, stumbling, slurred words, and an inability to stand straight. It wasn't Squidward's dry wit, it was alcohol, lots of it. When Bumpass took the breathalyzer, he blew twice the legal limit. No comedic timing could save him. He was arrested for DUI on the spot and released on a hefty bail the next morning. The headlines wrote themselves. For a moment, the voice of Squidward had become a public punchline. In the aftermath, the story split in two. Bumpass claimed he was cooperative and admitted to his mistake, but the police version was less forgiving, painting a picture of a man barely in control. Fans wondered if Nickelodeon would cut ties. After all, Squidward is a staple of family TV, and corporations don't mess around when reputations are at stake. But in a move that surprised many, Bumpass kept his job. Maybe the world was willing to forgive a bad night, or maybe people secretly thought Squidward would be the one cartoon most likely to get pulled over anyway. The incident faded, but the story stuck, a classic case of art imitating life, or maybe the other way around. Squidward's cynicism and exhaustion hit a little closer to home after that. Roger Bumpass proved that sometimes the most relatable cartoon characters are voiced by people fighting their own battles on and off the mic. The line between fiction and reality. Sometimes it's just a matter of who's holding the wheel. John Morales. Now, this is irony that even a cartoon couldn't make up. You probably remember McGruff the crime dog, the trench-coat-wearing, gravel-voiced hound who told a generation to take a bite out of crime. He was a legend in PSA history, warning kids about everything from stranger danger to the perils of drugs. But what if I told you the man behind the fur costume was running from the law himself? Enter John Morales. In the 1990s, Morales was one of the real-life actors hired to portray McGruff at public events, parades, and school assemblies. Kids would line up for pictures, parents felt reassured, and everyone figured McGruff was exactly who he claimed to be, a champion against crime. Fast forward to 2011. Morales gets pulled over for speeding in Texas. Seems harmless, right? Wrong. A drug-sniffing dog goes wild at his car, and what cops find is beyond anything McGruff ever warned about. First, they find a stash of marijuana seeds. Then, a detailed blueprint for a full-scale grow operation. But it doesn't stop there. When they raid Morales' house, it's like a scene straight out of an action movie. Thousands of marijuana plants, 9,000 rounds of ammunition, and even a grenade launcher. That's right, the man who once told kids to say no to drugs was prepping for his own criminal empire, complete with enough firepower to equip a cartoon villain. The fallout was swift and brutal. Morales was convicted and sentenced to 16 years behind bars. His attorney argued he was just trying to provide for his family, but the judge wasn't having any of it. "Everything I read about you makes you seem like a scary person," the judge said. And just like that, McGruff's alter ego went from community hero to prison inmate. The twist? The real McGruff is still out there, with new actors stepping into the suit, still warning kids to avoid the kind of life John Morales ended up living. Sometimes the difference between hero and villain is just a change of costume, and a little bit of luck on the wrong side of the law. Irene Baddard. You know her voice from Disney's Pocahontas. Gentle, strong, iconic. But Irene Baddard's real-life journey reads like a script even Disney wouldn't greenlight. From breakout star to a cautionary headline, her story is one of public meltdowns, heartbreak, and the heavy price of fame. When Pocahontas hit theaters in 1995, Baddard was celebrated as the voice of Disney's first Native American princess. She was everywhere: interviews, premieres, red carpets. Her talent and authenticity made her an instant inspiration. But behind the scenes, she was fighting storms no fairy tale could fix. Years after her Disney triumph, Baddard's personal life unraveled in very public fashion. It started with whispers, reports of erratic behavior, drinking, and family disputes. In November 2020, things exploded. Baddard was arrested twice in 1 week. The first incident began with a domestic altercation. According to police reports, she showed up at her ex-husband's house, allegedly hit her teenage son, and ended up screaming at officers, insulting and mocking them until she had to be physically removed from the property. Bodycam footage made the rounds online, showing a side of the actress that was unrecognizable from her Disney persona. But that was just round one. Days later, Baddard had another public breakdown in a hotel lobby, resulting in yet another arrest for disorderly conduct. A year later, she was found passed out by the side of the road and again taken into custody. Each incident made headlines, fueling speculation about substance abuse and deep personal struggles. Friends and family said Irene was not herself when drinking. She later admitted to battling emotional problems for years, with alcohol making it worse. Hollywood is a world obsessed with image, but Baddard's collapse was impossible to hide. Roles dried up, and Disney quietly cut ties. Still, Baddard has tried to rebuild, taking minor acting gigs and speaking openly about mental health in interviews. Her story isn't just about the crash, but about trying to find solid ground after everything falls apart. The voice behind Pocahontas once made children believe they could paint with all the colors of the wind. But in real life, Irene Baddard struggled to find her way back when the lights faded and the applause stopped. Sometimes the most magical voices are also the most fragile. Matthew Broderick, you know the voice, you know the catchphrase. Adult Simba from Disney's The Lion King, the lion who finds redemption and courage. But the actor behind that inspiring roar, Matthew Broderick, carries a shadow that Hollywood rarely mentions. For many, Broderick is the king of coming-of-age cool, thanks to Ferris Bueller's Day Off. But one tragic moment in 1987 forever altered the story behind his success. It was supposed to be a romantic European getaway. Broderick and actress Jennifer Grey were driving in Northern Ireland, the kind of low-key escape you'd expect for rising stars. Then, everything changed in an instant. Broderick mistakenly drove onto the wrong side of the road, a mistake with devastating consequences. His rented BMW collided head-on with another car, killing 2 people, a mother and her daughter, Margaret Doherty and Anna Gallagher. Broderick and Grey both suffered serious injuries, but it was the loss of those 2 lives that sent shockwaves through the media. What happened next fueled even more controversy. Broderick was initially charged with causing death by dangerous driving, but after the case went to court, he was only fined $175 and returned home to the States. The victim's family was stunned by the leniency. Meanwhile, Hollywood barely blinked. Broderick's career didn't stall. He voiced Simba, starred in blockbusters, and never faced professional blacklisting. For years, fans debated whether justice had truly been served. Broderick himself has spoken about the guilt, admitting he struggled to cope with what happened. Therapy helped, but the shadow of that crash followed him, even resurfacing when he appeared in car commercials years later, with critics pointing out the uncomfortable irony. The truth? Sometimes, real life doesn't play by storybook rules. Broderick's legacy will always include both the triumph of Simba and the tragedy of that fateful day in Ireland. In Hollywood, as in life, even heroes can have moments that haunt them. For fans, it's a sobering reminder. The faces and voices behind our favorite characters are far more complicated than any cartoon could ever capture. Chris Lada. If you grew up in the 80s, Chris Lada's voice probably echoed through your living room on Saturday mornings, shrieking as Starscream in Transformers or hissing orders as Cobra Commander in G.I. Joe. Lada was the king of cartoon villains, his high-pitched, chaotic delivery instantly recognizable to anyone within earshot of a TV. But off-mic, Lada's real life was even more turbulent than his most infamous characters. Lada wasn't just a one-note performer. He was legendary for his range, his relentless energy, and a knack for bringing menace to even the goofiest animated plots. But beneath the bravado was a man locked in a cycle of self-destruction. Colleagues described him as brilliant and wild, but also unpredictable, sometimes vanishing before a recording session, sometimes showing up in a haze. Lada's struggle with alcohol and substance use was an open secret, and it cost him jobs as well as friendships. The stories are as dramatic as anything in a cartoon. During one recording, Lada reportedly stormed out of the studio mid-sentence, leaving producers scrambling. His temper and erratic behavior were infamous. He could turn on the charm just as quickly as he could ignite a feud. By the early 90s, his battles had caught up with him. His health suffered, and roles became harder to land. Colleagues tried to help, but Lada's demons had a tighter grip than most realized. In 1994, Chris Lada died at just 44 years old. The cause? Complications from years of hard living. His friends mourned not just the loss of a voice, but the loss of a rare, chaotic talent. In the end, the man who brought to life the loudest, wildest villains of the cartoon universe couldn't escape the chaos inside himself. Lada's legacy is bittersweet. Every time Starscream cackles or Cobra Commander plots, you're hearing a voice that was battling as hard in real life as any cartoon nemesis ever did. Sometimes the line between villain and victim isn't as clear as we'd like to think. Jonathan Brandis. To a generation of 90s kids, Jonathan Brandis was everywhere, on TV, in movies, and yes, even in animation. Brandis voiced Mosenrath, the cunning young sorcerer from Disney's Aladdin animated series. On screen, he was the golden boy, handsome, charming, and talented beyond his years. Off-screen, he was the classic case of a child star crushed by the weight of expectation and sudden obscurity. Brandis broke out early, starring in The Never-Ending Story 2 and later in the sci-fi series Sequest DSV. He was adored by fans and could have been on top forever. But as he moved into adulthood, Hollywood's spotlight faded fast. The roles dried up, and Brandis struggled to redefine himself. Like so many who start young, he had built his whole identity on being wanted. When the calls stopped coming, the silence was brutal. Behind the public smile, Brandis was dealing with anxiety and depression. He tried to make a comeback, but the industry was already looking for the next young thing. Friends said he felt lost, unsure how to navigate a world where he was no longer the star. In rare interviews, Brandis admitted to feeling the pressure and isolation that comes with fading fame. Though his animated work as Mosenrath is still cherished by fans, it's the abrupt disappearance from Hollywood and the clear signs of struggle that haunt his legacy. His story is a gut punch for anyone who's ever dreamed of the big time. Success can vanish overnight, and the emotional fallout is rarely seen until it's too late. For all the magic he brought to the screen, Jonathan Brandis reminds us that even the brightest young stars can be left behind. It's a story Hollywood tells over and over, and one it never seems to learn from. Christine Kavanaaugh. Dexter, Chucky Finster, Babe the Pig. Christine Kavanagh gave them all a spark, turning animated oddballs into household names. Her voice was pure cartoon magic, instantly recognizable and endlessly endearing. But in 2001, at the height of her powers, Kavanagh made a move that stunned the animation world. She walked away, and what happened next left fans with more questions than answers. Kavanagh's career was the kind actors dream of. She bounced from Rugrats to Dexter's Laboratory to Babe, often playing misfit heroes or nerdy geniuses with an edge. Her performances were so good, kids and parents alike felt they really knew her. But behind the scenes, Kavanaaugh was intensely private. The attention never sat right with her, and the pressures of Hollywood weighed heavy. After years of giving voice to others, she stopped recording and vanished from the public eye. No interviews, no conventions, no fanfare. Some said she was exhausted by the grind. Others whispered about personal struggles, including mental health issues and the pain of losing her father. What's certain is that she left behind a legacy of characters loved by millions, then closed the door on fame without a second glance. In 2014, fans were stunned to hear Kavanagh had passed away at just 51. The cause was never made public. Friends said she valued her privacy to the end, wanting her work to speak for itself. Her disappearance from animation only made her more legendary, proof that the people behind the voices often carry burdens no one else can see. For every wild, adventurous, or clever cartoon kid, there's a human story behind the mic. Christine Kavanaugh's voice lives on, but her exit is a haunting reminder that not everyone is built for the spotlight, no matter how bright their talent shines. Judy Strangus. You might remember Judy Strangus as Sparky from Speed Buggy or as Firestar in Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends. Her voice was a staple of the Saturday morning cartoon scene, always cheerful, always energetic. But when the cameras stopped rolling, Strangus faced a real-life crisis that would test anyone's spirit, a disaster far removed from the harmless hijinks of animation. Strangus's career was built on reliability. She was the go-to for young, plucky heroines, and producers loved her work ethic. But in 2001, tragedy struck. A fire tore through her home, destroying everything she owned and leaving her essentially homeless overnight. Unlike in cartoons, there were no quick fixes or comic relief. The loss was overwhelming, and for someone who had spent her career projecting joy, the aftermath was isolating and traumatic. For years, Strangus battled PTSD, struggling to rebuild her life from the ashes. Friends described her as a survivor, but also noted the toll it took on her emotionally. She largely retreated from the industry, focusing on personal recovery instead of chasing roles or appearances. The world of voice acting moved on, but Strangus's absence was felt by anyone who remembered her infectious enthusiasm. Occasionally, she would show up at conventions, her resilience and humor still intact, but she never returned to the spotlight full-time. The experience changed her, made her more cautious, more reflective, but also more appreciative of the small things. Unlike her cartoon alter egos, there was no grand adventure waiting just around the corner, only the long, slow road back from trauma. Judy Strangus's story isn't about crime or scandal, but about the very real challenges that can hit anyone, even those whose job is to make others smile. Sometimes the greatest battles are fought far from the microphone, with no script and no laugh track to lighten the load. Garry. You might not know her face, but you definitely know her voice. Garry was the queen of 80s animation, lending her talents to everything from He-Man and the Masters of the Universe to Spider-Man and She-Ra. For a generation, she was the steady, maternal presence that anchored wild cartoon universes. But while her characters seemed invincible, Garry was fighting a secret war, one that even her closest colleagues barely suspected. In the golden era of Saturday morning TV, Garry was everywhere. She was Tila, the sorceress, Aunt May, and dozens of others. The sheer number of her roles was staggering. She was known for her warmth, her professionalism, and her ability to make even the smallest part memorable. Kids grew up hearing her voice, never knowing the toll her relentless work schedule was taking. Behind the scenes, Garry was locked in a decade-long struggle with brain cancer. She kept it almost completely private, refusing to let it interfere with her work. As her illness progressed, Garry continued recording, often coming to sessions exhausted but determined. Friends said she'd never complain, even as the treatments became more grueling. The cartoon worlds she helped create were a refuge, not just for viewers, but for her as well. In 1995, at just 50 years old, Garry passed away. Her death sent shockwaves through the animation community. Many were stunned, having no idea she'd been sick at all. It was only after her passing that the full extent of her battle came to light. Garry's story is a quiet tragedy, one of incredible strength, private pain, and an unwavering commitment to her craft. She never got the headline-grabbing scandals or public meltdowns. Her darkness was fought in silence, away from the fans and the fame. For those who remember her work, it's a reminder that sometimes the bravest heroes are the ones you never see, fighting battles the world never knows about. Crick. If you were a kid in the 90s, the Ren and Stimpy show probably blew your mind and maybe disturbed you a little too. It was weird, wild, and totally unlike any other cartoon on TV. At the center of that chaos was Crick, the show's creator and the original voice of Ren. On screen, Ren was manic and unpredictable. Off-screen, Crick was even harder to pin down. Crick was hailed as a creative genius, the kind of guy who could turn the rules of animation upside down and still land on his feet. But he was also notorious in the industry for erratic behavior, intense feuds with networks, and a perfectionism that drove his team to exhaustion. Working for him was like being in a pressure cooker, sometimes exhilarating, often overwhelming. But in 2018, a much darker side came to light. Several former fans and aspiring artists accused Crick of crossing professional and personal boundaries, with reports of inappropriate relationships and misconduct. The stories were backed up by documents and interviews, painting a picture of someone who used his influence in deeply troubling ways. Nickelodeon and other networks immediately cut all ties, and the animation world was forced to reckon with the man behind one of its most iconic, boundary-pushing shows. Crick apologized, admitting to some of the allegations and blaming his actions on personal struggles and the pressures of fame. But for many fans, the damage was done. The revelation shook the cartoon community, raising uncomfortable questions about who gets to make the shows we love and what goes on behind the creative curtain. Today, Ren and Stimpy is still celebrated for its bold style and wild humor. But now, there's always an asterisk. Crick story is a warning. Sometimes the same brilliance that creates something truly original can also hide something much darker. The world of animation, like every industry, has its heroes and its villains, and sometimes they're the same person. So, the next time you hear your favorite cartoon character, remember, the voices behind the magic have lived stories way stranger and sometimes much darker than anything a Saturday morning marathon could dream up. Which of these tales surprised you the most? Drop your thoughts below and let's get a real conversation going. Hit like, subscribe, and share if you want more secrets from the shadows of pop culture. Because in the world of animation, reality is always more bizarre than fiction.